Lena had been working at the restaurant long enough to know every table by the sound of its legs sliding across the wooden floor. She knew which chairs wobbled a little, which window caught extra sunlight in the late afternoon, and which guests loved to complain even when everything was perfect. It wasn't an easy job, but it was honest, and it helped her pay her bills on time. She didn't expect life to be smooth or fair, but she tried to handle each day with patience. On that particular evening, the air in the restaurant felt heavier than usual. The evenings were always busy, but this one carried a different energy, almost like the room itself knew that someone important was about to walk in. The other staff whispered about a wealthy guest who had made a reservation for a private dinner with friends. Lena didn't think much of it. Rich people came and went all the time, each with their own demands. Some were polite, some weren't, and she had learned not to let any of it get under her skin. When the door opened and the group stepped in, she recognized the man leading them. Everyone did. He was a well-known millionaire, one of those people whose name appeared in magazines and business articles. He carried himself with a kind of confidence that made the whole room shift around him. People straightened their posture, lowered their voices, and even the manager hurried out from the back to greet him personally. Lena watched from across the room as the manager spoke to him with exaggerated smiles. She tried not to roll her eyes. She had seen enough of this routine to know that the wealthy guests often enjoyed the performance of being treated like royalty. They expected it. They liked it. And the restaurant needed their money, so everyone played along. She was assigned to serve their table, which didn't surprise her. The manager always picked her whenever someone important came in. Her voice was calm. She didn't get flustered easily, and she had a way of communicating with guests without making them feel rushed. She wished she could decline the shift at their table, but she knew there was no choice. Carrying her tray, she approached the group with a polite smile. The millionaire sat at the center, like a king at the head of a long table. Beside him were men and women dressed in elegant clothes, laughing and sipping expensive drinks. They barely glanced at Lena when she arrived. To them, she was just part of the background. She took their orders with a patient tone, repeating each detail more loudly than usual, because the group kept interrupting one another. As she walked back to the kitchen to give the order, she let out a quiet breath. Nights like this made her feet ache more than usual. When the meals were ready, she returned to the table, balancing several plates. Everything was fine until one of the guests suddenly leaned back without looking. Lena tried to shift quickly, but her elbow bumped the edge of the millionaire's glass. It didn't spill completely, but a splash of dark liquid hit the tablecloth. The sound was small, but the reaction WASN single quotes T. The table fell quiet. The millionaire slowly looked down at the wet stain and up at Lena with a raised eyebrow. "Well," he said, with a voice that carried more judgment than volume, "I suppose this is your version of fine service?" Lena felt her stomach tighten. "I'm very sorry, sir," she said gently. "It was an accident. I'll clean it immediately." A couple of his friends smirked. One of them whispered something that made the others chuckle. Lena felt the heat rising in her chest, but held her expression steady. She laid a napkin over the spill and offered to bring a new glass. "What's your name?" the millionaire asked, not because he cared, but because he wanted the moment to sting a little more. "Lena," she answered quietly. He leaned back in his chair and studied her. "Lena," he repeated slowly, "do you at least have a talent outside of bumping into tables?" It was a cruel question, tossed out casually like a piece of scrap. The group laughed again, waiting to see if she'd crack. Lena forced a small smile, trying to stay professional. "I like music," she said softly. She didn't know why she said it. It slipped out without thought, an honest truth she usually kept to herself. The millionaire lifted his brows with exaggerated surprise. "Music? You play something?" A little, she said. Mostly piano. Just as a hobby. Her honesty was all the invitation he needed. He laughed loudly, shaking his head as if she had told the funniest joke of the evening. You? Piano? He looked at his friends. Can you imagine? They all joined in, amused at the idea of a waitress claiming to play something as elegant as piano. Lena felt the embarrassment crawl up her neck, but she kept her voice steady. My grandfather taught me when I was young, she said. I'm not a professional, but I enjoy it. The millionaire waved his hand dismissively, still chuckling. Then he leaned forward as if he'd just come up with a brilliant idea. Well then, Lena the musician, he said, you should play for us sometime. She blinked, unsure if he was serious. I don't perform for people, sir, she said carefully. Oh, come on, he replied, amused by her discomfort. In fact, I'm hosting a private party this weekend. Big event. Important people. How about you come and show us your piano skills? The table burst into laughter. Some guests clapped sarcastically, enjoying the show he was putting on. It was obvious the invitation wasn't real, not in a kind way. It was a challenge meant to embarrass her further. They expected her to say no. They expected her to shrink. Lena took a slow breath, her hands tightening slightly around the tray she held. She had been humiliated before in life, but something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was because they were laughing at her passion. Maybe it was because piano was one of the few things that made her feel like herself. Or maybe it was because she suddenly felt exhausted from always playing it, safe and staying quiet. She looked the millionaire in the eyes and said, If you want me there, I'll come. The table went silent for a second. He didn't expect her to agree. The smirk returned to his face, sharper this time. Excellent, he said. I'll have my assistant send the details. Don't worry, Lena. I'm sure it'll be entertaining. They all laughed again, but this time she didn't feel as shaken. The laughter didn't sting as much. She carried the tray back to the kitchen and set it down slowly, letting out a long breath when she finally had a moment alone. Her coworker noticed the look on her face. You okay? She asked, wiping down a counter. Lena nodded, though her heart felt tangled. Just another night, she answered softly. But inside, she felt something shifting in uneasiness mixed with determination. On her break, she sat outside behind the restaurant, where the air was cool and the street was quiet. Her hands rested in her lap, still trembling slightly. She thought about her grandfather's hands, gentle and warm, guiding hers across the piano keys when she was little. He used to say that music was a place where people could speak without being interrupted. She loved that idea. She loved the feeling of sitting in front of the piano, letting the world fall away for a moment. But she hadn't played seriously in a long time. Life didn't leave space for it. Between rent, bills, and long shifts, her old keyboard in the corner of her apartment gathered more dust than notes. She missed it. She missed the comfort it once brought her. Now she had agreed to play in front of a mansion, full of strangers who were expecting her to fail. Maybe her decision had been foolish. Maybe pride had taken over for a moment. But she couldn't take it back now. After her shift ended, she walked home slowly. The night was cool, and the streets were quiet, with only distant car lights passing by. When she reached her small apartment, she turned on a single lamp in the living room. The soft yellow light filled the space. Her old keyboard sat against the wall under the window, looking lonely but familiar. She walked over to it and gently brushed her fingers across the keys. Some were scratched, and a few had faded letters written on them from when she was younger and trying to memorize notes. She sat down on the stool, which creaked softly beneath her weight. Now her first note was hesitant, a little shaky, but the sound was warm. She played another, then another, until a small melody began to form. It wasn't perfect. She made mistakes. Her fingers were stiff from years of not practicing properly. But something inside her loosened as she played. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed. She closed her eyes and let the music guide her instead of forcing it. Memories drifted through her mind, her grandfather laughing softly as she struggled to play a simple tune. Her younger self dreaming of performing one day. The way the piano made her feel like anything was possible. When she finally stopped, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She sat there quietly, absorbing the stillness around her. She wasn't ready for a mansion full of wealthy strangers. She wasn't ready to be laughed at more than she already had been. But she wasn't ready to back down either. She didn't want fame or recognition. She didn't even want to impress the millionaire or his friends. She just wanted to stand up for herself, to show them that their laughter didn't define her dot as the night grew deeper. She placed her hands back on the keys. She wasn't sure if she would be able to perform well at the party, but she knew she would practice. She would try. She would give herself the same patience she gave everyone else. She played long past midnight, letting the notes echo softly through her small apartment. Each moment felt like a step toward something new. She didn't fully understand yet. By the time she finally went to bed, she felt tired. Lena woke up the next morning feeling the weight of the previous night settle into her shoulders. At first, she didn't even remember saying yes to the millionaire's challenge. She just stared at the ceiling, letting her thoughts catch up with her slowly. When the memory finally returned, she almost groaned aloud. She had agreed to play piano at a party filled with wealthy strangers who didn't believe in her and who fully expected her to embarrass herself. The thought alone made her stomach tighten. She sat up in bed and pushed her blanket aside. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the old refrigerator. Her apartment wasn't big, just one bedroom, a small kitchen, and the living room where her keyboard sat against the window, but it was hers. It was the place where she came back after long shifts, where she allowed herself to breathe in peace. She took a moment to gather herself before stepping out of bed. As she walked to the kitchen, she glanced at the keyboard again. Last night she had stayed up longer than she should have, practicing until her fingers were sore. Part of her hoped that if she practiced enough, the fear she felt would fade. But it hadn't. If anything, the fear felt sharper in the morning light. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at the small dining table. She cupped the warm mug in her hands, letting the heat settle into her palms. Her mind kept drifting back to the millionaire's face, how he smirked, how his friends snickered, how they waited for her to crumble. She didn't want to give them that satisfaction. She wanted to prove that she wasn't someone who could be pushed around, but wanting something and being ready for it were two different things. Her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up and saw a message from the restaurant group chat. Someone had posted a picture of last night's reservation list with a few laughing emojis, as if the entire place knew what had happened. Her coworker had also sent her a private message. "Are you really going to that party?" Lena stared at the screen for a moment before typing back, "Yes." A moment later, her coworker replied, "You're brave. Let me know if you need anything." That small message eased Lena's chest a little. It reminded her that even though she felt alone in the moment, there were people who believed in her quietly, people who didn't laugh at her dreams. She finished her tea and went to get ready for work. The walk to the restaurant was short, just a few blocks, but she took her time. The morning air was cool, and the street was quieter than usual. She noticed small details. She usually rushed past the old man sweeping outside his shop, the dog poking its head out of a window, the bakery owner arranging fresh bread in the display. These simple moments grounded her. When she arrived at the restaurant, the manager gave her a brief nod. He didn't mention last night, but the other staff glanced at her with curious eyes. Some offered small smiles. Others whispered quietly to each other. Lena ignored it as best she could and began her shift. A few hours passed before she finally got a short break. She stepped outside to breathe for a moment. The sky had brightened, and the city noise seemed louder than earlier. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. "You really said yes?" A familiar voice asked. She opened her eyes and saw her coworker standing beside her, arms crossed but smiling. "I didn't plan to," Lena admitted. "It just came out." Her coworker raised an eyebrow. "Are you scared?" "Very," Lena confessed softly. "Then use it," her coworker said. "Sometimes fear makes us do our best. You love piano. Don't forget that part." Lena nodded slowly. Those words stuck with her long after her break ended. The rest of the shift passed without any major issues, though her mind wasn't fully focused. She kept replaying different scenarios in her head, some where the performance went well, others where everything went terribly wrong. She tried not to let the worst possibilities take over, but they lingered anyway. After work, she walked home a little faster than in the morning. The sun was setting, painting the sky with warm colors that reminded her of soft piano notes. When she reached her apartment, she placed her bag down and sat at the keyboard again. The stool creaked, the familiar sound grounding her. She placed her hands on the keys. The first notes she played were slow and uncertain. Her fingers felt stiff, as if they were unsure where to go. But she kept going, repeating small parts over and over until they felt smoother. She switched between old melodies she remembered and new ones that drifted into her mind unexpectedly. Hours passed without her noticing Dot. Every now and then, she stopped and looked out the window. Cars passed by. People walked on the sidewalk, talking and laughing. Life continued outside, unaware of the anxiety twisting in her chest. She pressed her fingers against the keys again, repeating a phrase her grandfather taught her when she was young. "Play with your heart first. Your hands will follow." She whispered the words to herself, as if saying them aloud would make them real again. Late into the evening, she finally took a break. She stretched her fingers and walked to the kitchen. Her phone buzzed once more. It was a message from the millionaire's assistant. The details of the party arrived. The message included the time, address, and a small note that read, "Dress appropriately." Lena stared at those two words for a long moment. Appropriately. She didn't know what that meant for someone like her. She didn't own expensive dresses or jewelry. She didn't have anything that would match the luxury of the mansion she was expected to walk into. She opened her closet and looked through her clothes. Most were simple button-up shirts, black pants for work, a few casual dresses. Then she spotted a dress tucked toward the back. It wasn't expensive or new, but it was elegant in a quiet way. Soft fabric, simple neckline, a color that didn't scream for attention. Her aunt had given it to her for a family gathering years ago. She slipped it off the hanger and held it against her body while looking in the mirror. She looked like herself, not someone pretending to fit into a rich crowd. That felt right. Dot. She hung it near her bedroom door. Just the sight of it made her heart beat faster. The next day, she followed almost the same routine: work, home, practice. Each day brought her closer to the party, and each day she felt the pressure tighten. Yet with every hour of practice, something else grew too, a quiet confidence she didn't expect. One evening, while she was practicing a melody she had created years ago, she heard a soft knock at her door. She wasn't expecting anyone, so she paused and walked over. When she opened the door, she found her neighbor from down the hall, holding a plate of warm food. "I heard your piano again," the neighbor said with a gentle smile. "You play beautifully. I hope you're eating enough. You work so hard." Lena's eyes softened. She accepted the plate gratefully. "Thank you. That's very kind. Keep practicing," the neighbor said as she walked away. "It sounds like your heart needs it." The door closed softly, and Lena looked down at the plate of food. Moments like this reminded her that kindness still existed in the world. She set the plate on the table and returned to her keyboard with a warmer heart. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. Something inside her felt lighter, as if the fear was finally shifting into determination. She sat at the keyboard and played a gentle melody before even making tea. The sound filled her apartment, soft and hopeful. Later, at work, she moved with more ease. She didn't feel quite as nervous as before. Her coworkers noticed and asked how she was feeling. She answered honestly, "Still scared, but I think I'm ready to try." The day of the party grew closer. She made herself practice not only playing, but also controlling her breathing, calming her nerves, and imagining the audience as just a blur. She didn't need to see faces. She only needed to focus on the keys. The night before the party, she sat at the keyboard longer than usual. She played until her fingers felt relaxed and warm. Then she closed her eyes and let the final note fade into the quiet room. She whispered softly, "You can do this." For the first time since the challenge began, she believed it just a little. When she finally stood up from the keyboard, she felt calmer. She walked to her bedroom, looked at the dress she had chosen, and smoothed the fabric gently. Tomorrow she would step into a world she didn't belong to, in front of people who doubted her. But she would go anyway. She wasn't trying to impress them. She wasn't trying to change their minds. She was simply trying to honor the part of herself she had ignored for too long, the part that loved music, the part that refused to shrink, the part that deserved to be heard at least once. She turned off the lights and went to bed, her heart steady, her hands ready, and her spirit quietly rising. The day of the party arrived faster than Lena expected. All morning, she moved around her apartment with a quiet nervousness, checking things she had already checked twice: her dress, hanging by the door, her small purse, the printed message with the party address. She kept glancing at the clock, even though she knew she still had hours before she needed to leave. Her heart wouldn't settle. She made herself a light breakfast, though she barely ate. Every time she tried to take a bite, her stomach tightened. She kept thinking about the wealthy guests, their polished shoes, their confident laughter, and the way they would all turn to stare at her the moment the millionaire introduced her. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. She didn't even like being noticed at work. She preferred moving quietly through her day, doing her tasks, staying out of conflict. But now she was walking toward a moment she couldn't hide from. Before noon, she sat at her keyboard one last time to warm up her fingers. She didn't plan to rehearse heavily. She wanted her mind to stay fresh, not overwhelmed. She touched the keys gently, letting a soft melody drift from her fingertips. It wasn't perfect, but it soothed her. The sound wrapped around her like a small, comforting reminder that the piano wasn't the enemy. The fear wasn't the enemy. Only the doubt she carried inside herself was. She closed her eyes and played for a few minutes, letting the notes settle her breathing. When she opened her eyes again, the room felt a little calmer. As afternoon settled in, she finally started getting ready. She slipped into her dress and stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the fabric with her hands. The dress wasn't fancy compared to what she imagined the party guests would wear, but it made her feel like herself. Not someone pretending to be elegant, just someone trying to show respect for the moment. Her hair, which she normally tied in a simple ponytail for work, she brushed out and pinned gently behind her ears. She used a light touch of makeup, just enough to look awake and confident. When she looked at herself again, she saw someone who was trying someone who wasn't giving up. The walk to the bus stop felt unusually long. She held her purse close as she waited. A few cars rushed by, splashing puddles left over from the morning rain. Her fingers tapped lightly against her purse in an unconscious rhythm, as if they were searching for piano keys. When the bus finally arrived, She stepped inside and found a seat near the window. The ride took about 40 minutes. She watched the shops, houses, and small parks pass by, each one slowly becoming more expensive looking the closer she got to the address. Her mind drifted between hope and fear, imagining the moment she would step into the millionaire's mansion. She didn't know how they would treat her, but she could guess. She had seen enough reactions last night to know what they thought of her dot. She got off the bus a few blocks from the mansion. The houses there were huge, large porches, wide lawns, tall gates, bright lights that made everything look polished. She had never walked through this kind of neighborhood before. It felt like stepping into another world. She took a deep breath and tried not to feel small. When she reached the mansion gate, a man in a suit stood there checking the guest list. He didn't look at her with interest or kindness. His eyes scanned her quickly, as if trying to understand why someone dressed simply would be arriving there. "Name?" he asked in a tired voice. "Lena," she answered quietly. "I was asked to come by." Before she finished, he found her name on the list. "Yes," he said. "Go ahead." The gate opened slowly. She stepped through, her shoes clicking lightly on the stone path. The mansion stood tall in front of her, lit by golden lights that made the windows glow. She could already hear the sound of voices and laughter spilling from inside Dot as she approached the door. Another staff member opened it for her. The moment she stepped in, warmth and noise wrapped around her. The entrance hall was enormous, with a chandelier hanging above and people dressed in beautiful clothes moving around with small plates and glasses. Everything looked expensive, the furniture, the artwork, even the flowers arranged around the room. She felt out of place immediately, but she kept her chin up. Some guests glanced at her briefly, not recognizing her, then returned to their conversations. Others stared a little longer, their eyes filled with curiosity or confusion. She walked through the room slowly, trying to find a quiet corner where she could stand without being noticed. But before she reached the edge of the crowd, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, look who made it." She turned around and saw the millionaire approaching with a glass in his hand. His smile was wide, but not warm. It had the same mocking edge she remembered from the restaurant. "I wasn't sure you'd show up," he said, "but I'm impressed. You clean up nicely." Lena kept her expression calm. "You invited me," she said simply. He chuckled. "Right, I did." He looked her up and down again before turning to the people around him. "Everyone, this is the waitress I told you about." The words cut through the room louder than he probably intended. A few heads turned toward her. The conversation softened as curiosity spread. Lena swallowed gently and kept her posture steady. The millionaire lifted his glass slightly. "Remember how she said she plays piano? Well, tonight she proved it." More people turned. Some raised their brows. Others whispered. It felt like being placed under a spotlight before she had even touched the piano. "So," he said, gesturing toward the center of the room, "make yourself comfortable. We'll begin soon." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone among strangers, whose eyes lingered a little too long. Lena breathed out slowly and found a place near Ray, the side wall where she could stand without blocking anyone. From there, she could see the large grand piano positioned in the center of the living room. It was beautiful, sleek, polished, and intimidating. She had never played a real grand piano before, only upright pianos in school and her old keyboard at home. The thought made her heart speed up again. She watched as guests drifted around the room, laughing and sipping their drinks. The music playing softly through hidden speakers gave the evening an elegant softness. But even that couldn't calm her completely. Every time she looked at the piano, her stomach tightened. She reminded herself that she had practiced. She had prepared. She had done everything she could. Now she just needed to breathe. But in a room full of people waiting for a show, either to cheer or to mock, it felt harder than usual. A few minutes passed before the millionaire clinked a glass loudly, signaling for the room to settle. Conversations faded, and guests turned toward him. Everyone. He said with a dramatic smile, "Thank you for coming tonight. As you know, I enjoy hosting these gatherings to bring talented people together. And tonight, we have someone very unexpected." A small wave of laughter spread through the crowd. He gestured toward Lena. "Our lovely waitress here claims she can play the piano. She seemed very confident when she told us last night. So I thought, why not give her a chance to shine?" Lena felt dozens of eyes turn to her. Her chest tightened, but she refused to drop her gaze. The millionaire stepped aside and motioned toward the piano. "Please," he said, "the stage is yours." She stepped forward slowly, feeling every heartbeat echo in her ears. The room seemed impossibly quiet. Even her footsteps sounded loud. When she reached the piano, she stared at the glossy keys, her reflection dimly visible in the shine. She placed her shaking hands gently at her sides and took a breath. Someone in the crowd murmured, "This should be interesting." Another person chuckled under their breath. Lena sat down on the bench. The cushion was softer than she expected. The piano felt enormous, powerful. She placed her hands on her lap for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She told herself not to look at the audience, not to think about the millionaire, or the whispers, or the expectations. She needed to focus on the keys. Slowly, she lifted her hands and placed her fingertips lightly on the cold surface of the piano keys. Her fingers trembled. She closed her eyes for a moment and pictured her grandfather sitting beside her when she was little. She imagined his gentle voice telling her to breathe, to trust herself, to let the music guide her. She opened her eyes again and pressed the first key. A single note filled the room, clear and delicate. She pressed another, then another. Her hands moved slowly at first, hesitant but steady. The opening of the melody drifted into the room like a soft whisper. For a moment, she forgot the crowd completely. The music wrapped around her, pulling her into the memory of her small apartment, the comfort of her old keyboard, and the warm lessons she had learned long ago. She kept playing, and as she moved deeper into the melody, something shifted, not just in her, but in the room around her. But she didn't know that yet. All she knew was that her fear was slowly melting under the sound of her own music. The next morning arrived far too quickly for her liking. She barely slept after the party, replaying everything in her mind, the shining piano under the lights, the silence that wrapped around the room when she played, the faces that changed from doubt to shock, and the millionaire whose smirk slowly faded into something more unreadable. She didn't know whether she should feel proud, anxious, or confused. All she knew was that her life had suddenly shifted, like a door had opened without warning, revealing a hallway she had never seen before. When she walked into the cafe for her morning shift, she expected the place to feel the same as always: the smell of coffee, the soft clinking of cups, the steady hum of regular customers talking about their routines. But instead, there were whispers. Eyes followed her, not in a rude way, but in a curious, almost cautious way, as if everyone had heard something but wasn't sure whether they were allowed to speak about it. She froze when she reached the counter. Her manager stood there, leaning against the register, holding a newspaper. That didn't surprise her. What surprised her was the front page he silently pointed to. There it was, a photo of the party, blurry but clear enough to show her at the piano, her fingers midair, the crowd staring. The headline wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to make her heart flip. Unexpected talent stuns crowd at private gala. She didn't know whether it was good or bad. She didn't even know how the photo made it into the paper. Maybe a guest took it. Maybe someone wrote about the party. Maybe someone mentioned her name. She wasn't even sure she wanted to know. Her manager only sighed softly and lowered the paper. "You should have told us," he said. She blinked. "Told you what? That you can play like this?" He tapped the picture. "Half of the staff saw this morning." She wished the ground would swallow her. "I didn't think it mattered. It's just something I used to do." He nodded slowly, studying her face. "Well, it matters now. People are asking questions." Her heart sank. "Questions?" He shrugged. "Nothing bad. Just curiosity. Don't worry. You still have your job. But something tells me you won't be here long." His words made her stomach twist. She liked her job. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept her stable, and she knew every corner of the cafe, every regular's usual order, every shift pattern. The thought of leaving wasn't exciting. It was terrifying. Before she could reply, the front door chimed. She turned and froze again. The millionaire walked in. He wasn't dressed like he had been at the party. Instead of a sharp suit, he wore a simple jacket, his hair a bit messy, as if he hadn't slept much either. But he carried the same air of someone used to being noticed, someone people always cleared space for. She didn't expect to ever see him again. She especially didn't expect him to walk into her workplace. Her manager glanced at her, then quietly backed away, pretending to organize the shelves. The millionaire approached the counter, his expression unreadable. She swallowed hard and tried to stand tall. "Good morning," she said softly, trying to steady her voice. "What can I get for you?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to decide what he wanted to say. Finally, he spoke. "Do you have a minute?" She looked toward her manager, nervous. He gave a small nod, silently granting permission. She stepped aside with the millionaire, moving to the corner of the cafe where no one could hear them clearly. Her heart pounded. She had no idea why he was here. Maybe he was upset she embarrassed him. Maybe he thought she made him look foolish in front of his guests. Maybe he came to tell her to stay away from his circles. She braced herself. He surprised her instead. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. She blinked in disbelief. That was the last thing she expected. "I misjudged you," he continued. "I thought you were a waitress who was trying too hard to fit in where she didn't belong. I used that to make a point in front of my guests. It was wrong." She didn't know how to respond. Nobody from people like him ever apologized to people like her. She didn't even know whether she should trust it. She stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," he sighed, "your playing humbled everyone in that room, including me." She shook her head slightly. "I didn't play to humble anyone. I just saw the piano, and I couldn't walk away." He nodded as if he understood, even though she doubted he truly did. But something had shifted in him. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They seemed almost tired, as if he had been thinking about the night as much as she had. "There's another reason I came," he said. "Last night, several of my guests asked who you were, and a few of them want to meet you properly." Her breath caught. "Meet me? Why?" "To talk," he said. "To hear you play again. To explore possibilities." She didn't know what possibilities meant, but it sounded like a big word. A word that could change everything if she wasn't careful. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she whispered. "I know." He softened his tone. "But you might not have much time to decide. People are already interested. And trust me, attention like this doesn't last forever." She didn't respond. Her thoughts tangled together, forming knots she couldn't untie. Her life had been simple until 2 nights ago. Now it felt like she was standing on the edge of something she could barely describe. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. "This is my assistant's number," he said. "Call if you're willing to talk. Not about me. About opportunities." She didn't take the card immediately. She stared at it, afraid of what holding it might mean. Finally, with a shaky breath, she reached out and accepted it. He stepped back. "Take your time. I won't pressure you. But don't deny yourself because you think you don't belong. You proved last night that you do." With that, he walked out of the CAFE acute dot. She remained frozen for a long moment, clutching the card as if it might burst into flames. She wasn't sure whether she felt relieved, overwhelmed, or even more nervous than before. Her manager approached her carefully. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I think so." He studied her expression, then smiled gently. "Looks like life is calling you. Whether you answer or not is up to you." She didn't know how to answer that either. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Her hands moved automatically, serving orders, wiping tables, ringing up customers, but her mind was far away. She thought about her mother, who used to clap softly whenever she finished practicing a song at home. She thought about the teacher who once believed she would go far. She thought about the dreams she had buried under bills and responsibilities. Maybe those dreams weren't dead. Maybe they were only asleep. When her shift ended, she walked home slowly, feeling the card in her pocket with every step. The sky was soft and gentle above her, painted in quiet colors. She felt small under it, but not in the same way as before. When she reached her apartment, she sat on her bed and stared at the card again. The name printed on it was unfamiliar, formal, distant. It represented a world she didn't belong to yet, maybe would never belong to, but she remembered how it felt to play that piano. How the world had disappeared for a moment. How her breath had steadied. How her hands had become sure again. Maybe she owed it to herself to at least try. Still, fear lingered like a shadow in the back of her mind. She had been disappointed before. She had watched opportunities slip away like sand. She had grown used to playing it safe. Finally, she set the card down on her knitstand. "Not tonight," she whispered. "I need to think." And she did. For hours. As the evening deepened, she made a simple dinner, though she could barely taste it. She sat by the small window in her room and looked out at the streetlights, wondering what her life might look like a year from now, or a month, or even a week. Then she heard a knock on her door. A gentle, hesitant knock. She frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her friends rarely visited without calling. Her neighbors usually kept to themselves. She stood slowly, unsure. When she opened the door, she froze. It wasn't someone she knew. It wasn't even someone from her building. It was someone who looked official. Someone carrying a folder. Someone who cleared their throats softly before speaking. "Are you the young woman who played at the event 2 nights ago?" Her heart skipped. "Yes," she said quietly. The person smiled politely. "I think you might want to hear what I have to say." And just like that, Part 4 ends, with the world knocking on her door, whether she felt ready for it or not. She stood frozen in her doorway, staring at the person who had come to see her. The hallway light flickered softly, and for a moment she wondered if she was dreaming or half asleep. But the person's steady gaze and the folder in their hand made everything real, far too real for her comfort. The visitor gave a small, polite smile. "I hope it's not a bad time," they said gently. "I won't take long. I just need to speak with you about something important." She hesitated, gripping the edge of her door. Who are you?" "I work with a music foundation," the visitor replied. "A few people who attended the party reached out to us. They mentioned your performance. They said it was remarkable." She felt her breath catch again, The same way it had when the newspaper headline came out, the same way it had when the millionaire walked into her cafe earlier that day. This was becoming too much too fast. She wasn't used to being noticed. She wasn't used to being wanted. The visitor lifted the folder slightly. "May I come in for a moment? We can talk inside, if you're comfortable." She glanced down her hallway, then back at the visitor. Something inside her whispered that this wasn't a danger, merely a door opening, whether she was ready or not. She stepped back slowly and nodded. "Okay, just come in." The visitor entered quietly. They didn't look around the apartment with judgment, which she appreciated. They simply sat at the small table near the window when she gestured to it. She sat across from them, though she wasn't sure she felt steady enough for a real conversation. The visitor placed the folder between them. "I'll get straight to the point," they said. "People were impressed by you. They want to support you, but before anything moves forward, we need to know more about you, your background, your training, your goals, and more importantly, what you want." She swallowed hard. "What I want?" "Yes," the visitor said softly. "Do you want music to be part of your life again?" She didn't answer right away. Her throat tightened. She thought of all the years she had avoided pianos because they reminded her of everything she had lost. She thought of her mother cheering for her when she was younger. She thought of the echoing silence in her small apartment, the absence of music, and the part of her heart that had seemed to fade with it. Finally, she spoke, barely above a whisper. "I don't know." "That's okay," the visitor said kindly. "You don't have to know today, but you should understand what's possible." They opened the folder and pushed a paper gently toward her. She didn't touch it immediately. Her eyes scanned the words: scholarship opportunities, training programs, auditions, grants for independent musicians. Names of people she had only heard about from old teachers. The world in the folder felt large. Too large. Bigger than her tiny apartment. Bigger than her stable but simple life at the cafe. It felt like opening a door to a room full of bright lights she hadn't seen in years. She shook her head slightly. "I'm just a waitress. I don't think I'm ready for something like this." The visitor smiled softly. "You're a waitress who stunned a room full of people who weren't easily impressed. That means something. Don't shrink yourself just because you've been living small for a while." Her eyes softened at the words. She knew they weren't meant to insult her. They were meant to remind her of something she had forgotten, that her value wasn't tied to her job or her past or her fear. Still, she felt overwhelmed. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" the visitor asked gently. She took a long breath, letting her thoughts settle before speaking. "Of hoping again. Of trying again. Of failing again." The visitor nodded with deep understanding. "Hope is frightening. Opportunities can be too. But sometimes the things that scare us the most are the things that change us the most." They paused before adding, "If you say no, nothing will change. Your life will stay safe, maybe even comfortable. But your talent, it will stay quiet. And from what I've seen, it wasn't meant to be quiet." She stared down at the folder, tracing the edge of the paper lightly. She didn't know what she wanted. She didn't know what she was capable of anymore. But she knew one thing. The music hadn't died inside her. It was still there, waiting, patient, steady, like an old friend she had forgotten. The visitor stood, sensing her need for space. "You don't have to give me your decision now. Read through everything. Think about it. I'll come back in 2 days to hear your answer." They handed her a small card with their number on it. "If you need to talk sooner, call me." She nodded, grateful for the time. The visitor headed toward the door, then paused. "And one more thing," they added gently. "No matter what you decide, your performance at that party changed more than just the guests' opinions. It reminded people what raw talent looks like. That is something rare. Don't ignore it just because you're afraid. With that, they left quietly, closing the door behind them. For a long moment, she simply stood there, listening to the silence. The apartment felt smaller now, but not in a bad way. More like she had outgrown it without realizing. She walked back to the table and sat down again, staring at the folder. Her phone buzzed. She hesitated, then picked it up. Got a message from the millionaire. I heard someone from the foundation visited you. Please don't feel pressured. Opportunity doesn't have to be rushed. But I meant what I said. You belong on a stage, not behind a counter. She exhaled slowly, unsure whether his message made her feel calm or tense. But she put the phone aside. Tonight wasn't about the millionaire. It wasn't about the visitors, the newspaper, the whispers, the attention. It was about her, the girl who had once dreamed of shining lights and brand. Piano keys. She spent hours reading through the documents in the folder. She read about training programs where pianists learned from some of the best musicians in the country. She read about scholarships that covered everything: travel, housing, lessons. She read about the foundation's goal of supporting hidden talent, especially people who stopped pursuing music because life got in the way. Every page felt like a hand reaching out, asking if she wanted to be lifted back into the world she once belonged to. Eventually, she set the papers aside and stepped away from the table. Her mind was buzzing. She needed air. She needed space. She grabbed her coat and walked outside, letting the night air cool her thoughts. The street was quiet, soft. A few cars passed now and then, but mostly it was peaceful. She walked without direction, letting her thoughts drift. At some point, she realized she had walked all the way to the park near her apartment. There was an old bench she used to sit on after long shifts when she first moved to the city. She sat there now, staring at the empty playground and the dim streetlights. She remembered a time when she used to play in public parks, sitting at those outdoor pianos, people left out during summer months. She remembered how strangers sometimes stopped and listened, how her heart felt alive then. She whispered to herself, "Can I really do this again?" The question floated in the air, soft and uncertain. Then she heard footsteps. She tensed at first, but relaxed slightly when she saw it was an older woman walking her dog. The woman gave her a kind smile as the dog sniffed around. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" the woman said. She nodded. "It is." The woman glanced at her more closely. "Are you all right, dear? You look like you're carrying something heavy." She almost smiled at that. "Maybe I am." The woman sat on the far end of the bench, while the dog curled up at her feet. "Sometimes life surprises us," the woman said, "and sometimes we're the ones who surprise life. Either way, it's good to listen to the part of you that knows the truth." She didn't know why, but the words sank deep. The woman eventually stood. "Whatever you're thinking about, choose the thing that makes you feel alive, not the thing that makes you feel safe." With that, the woman walked away, leaving her alone on the bench, but not lonely. Somehow, the stranger's words filled the space around her with a quiet warmth. After a long moment, she stood and began walking home. She felt different now. Not certain, not fearless, but steadier. When she returned to her apartment, she looked at the folder again. She didn't touch it yet. Instead, she walked to her small dresser and pulled out an old cloth. Wrapped inside was something she hadn't held in years, a small metronome she used when she practiced as a child. She set it on the table. She didn't wind it yet. She just looked at it. She whispered, "I miss you." It wasn't just the metronome she missed. It was the version of herself she used to be, hopeful, brave, determined. She sat at the table again, staring at the folder as if it would answer all her questions. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said softly into the empty room. "But maybe I don't have to be ready to start." She closed the folder gently and placed her hand on top of it, letting the weight of the moment settle in her heart. 2 days. That's all she had before the visitor returned. But deep down, she already felt her answer forming. Not loud, not certain, not bold, but real. And that was enough to change everything. The next 2 days passed slowly, like time itself had become cautious, tiptoeing around her as if not to push her too quickly. She moved through each hour with a strange mix of calm and nervous energy. She still went to work, still made coffee, still wiped tables and greeted customers, but everything felt different. Her hands moved the same way they always had, yet her thoughts wandered in directions she wasn't used to. The folder sat on her table every night, waiting for her. Sometimes she opened it and read the same lines again and again, as if expecting the words to rearrange themselves into something easier. Other times she closed it and just stared at it, trying to gather the courage she needed to choose a direction. On the morning of the second day, she woke up early, far earlier than she needed to. For a while, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The light that crept in from the window was gentle, soft like a quiet invitation. She felt no fear in that moment, just uncertainty, and a little bit of hope. When the knock finally came, she didn't jump this time. She expected it. She stood, smoothed her clothes, and opened the door. The visitor from the foundation stood there, holding the same gentle expression they'd worn last time. "May I come in?" they asked. She nodded and stepped aside. The visitor sat at the table, glancing at the folder that was still open, papers spread out as if she had been reading them moments before. She hadn't, but she didn't bother to hide anything. "Have you had time to think?" the visitor asked kindly. She sat across from them, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating softly but steadily. "Yes," she said. "A lot. And what have you decided?" the visitor asked. She took a slow breath, gathering her words not to impress, not to sound strong, but to be honest. "I'm scared," she said. "I'm scared of failing. I'm scared of hoping too much. I'm scared of changing my life and not being good enough." The visitor listened quietly, nodding. "But," she continued, "I think I'm more scared of not trying." The visitor's eyes softened. She looked down at her hands. "Music used to be everything to me. I stopped because I had to, not because I wanted to. And when I played at that party, it felt like something inside me woke up, something I didn't know I was missing." She finally lifted her eyes. "So, yes, I want to try. I don't know how far I'll go. I don't know what I'm capable of anymore. But I want to try." A warm smile spread across the visitor's face. "Then that's all we need to begin." They opened their bag and pulled out a new set of papers, contracts, schedules, program outlines, audition dates. But they didn't push them on her. They placed them gently on the table. "This process is step by step. You won't be thrown into anything. We'll guide you. You just have to show up and be willing." She nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and excitement feelings she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years. "How long will everything take?" she asked. "That depends on you," the visitor said. "But the first step is simple. We want to hear you play again. Not in a party setting. Not in a crowded room. Just you in a studio with a quiet piano. If we're going to help you, we need to understand where you are right now." Her heart fluttered at the idea. Playing alone felt more intimate than playing in front of the millionaire's guests. It felt like opening a part of herself that she had kept locked away. "When is it?" she asked. The visitor smiled. "This afternoon, if you're ready." She froze. "This afternoon?" "Yes, but if you need more time—" "No," she interrupted gently. I don't want to wait anymore. The visitor nodded with approval. Then let's plan for it. They talked for another 20 minutes, going over the basics. She listened carefully, though some of it felt overwhelming. Still, she didn't back away from any of it. She signed only the documents the visitor said were necessary for the first step, nothing binding, nothing permanent. Just an agreement that she was willing to explore opportunities. When the visitor left, she stood alone in her apartment again, surrounded by papers and possibilities. She felt lighter, though her nerves were buzzing like electricity under her skin. She looked at her small metronome on the table. Then, with a steadying breath, she picked it up and wound it gently. When it began ticking softly, she closed her eyes. The sound was faint but powerful. It anchored her. It reminded her who she used to be. She whispered, "I'm coming back." The hours passed slowly until afternoon. She changed her outfit 3 times before settling on something simple and neat. She didn't want to look like she was trying too hard, but she didn't want to look careless either. She braided her hair loosely and grabbed her bag. Before she left, her phone buzzed again, got another message from the millionaire. "Whatever happens today, don't forget what I told you. You earned all of this." She didn't reply, not because she was ignoring him, but because she didn't know what to say yet. She needed this moment to be her own. She reached the studio in the late afternoon. The building was quiet, with large windows and soft carpeted floors. A staff member guided her down a hallway to a room with a grand piano inside. The piano looked elegant and serious, the kind of instrument that demanded honesty from anyone who touched it. The visitor was already inside, sitting in a corner with a notebook. "Take your time," they said. "There's no rush. When you're ready, start with whatever piece feels right." She nodded and approached the piano. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her fingers on the keys. The piano felt cool under her touch, as if it were waiting patiently. She took a deep breath. Then she began to play dot at first. Her fingers hesitated, searching for confidence. The notes wavered slightly, and she felt a sudden wave of doubt. But she didn't stop. She kept going, letting the music guide her. Slowly, her hands grew steadier. Her breathing evened out. The room filled with sound soft, then warm, then full. She played a piece she learned in her teenage years, something gentle but emotional. The melody rose and fell like a story, full of longing and hope. Her eyes softened as she played, her shoulders loosening. The nervousness faded, replaced by something deeper connection. Memory, truth. When she finished, the room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the building. She looked up slowly. The visitor watched her with admiration. "You haven't forgotten," they said softly. "You just needed space to remember." She felt tears prick at her eyes, not sadness, not fear, but relief. For years she had carried the belief that she had lost her gift. But she hadn't. It had simply waited for her to return. The visitor stood and approached her. "You're ready," they said. "You're truly ready." She exhaled shakily. "So, what happens next?" "Well," the visitor said, sitting beside her, "the next few weeks will be full of practice, coaching, and small performances. We'll build you up slowly, step by step, and if everything goes well, you'll audition for a special showcase. It's not guaranteed, but it's a real chance." She nodded, absorbing the weight of those words as she left the studio. She felt lighter than she had in years. The air outside smelled fresh, the sky painted with soft evening colors. She walked home slowly, letting the day settle into her heart. When she reached her apartment, she finally replied to the millionaire, "Thank you. Today went well." He answered almost instantly, "I knew it would. If you ever need support or a place to practice, let me know." She smiled softly at the message, not because she needed anything from him, But because she finally understood something important, she didn't owe her future to him. She owed it to herself. The following weeks were busy. She woke early, practiced for hours, met with coaches, worked on pieces she hadn't touched in years, and learned new ones. She balanced her shifts at the cafe with lessons and training. It wasn't easy. She ended many nights exhausted, but she didn't complain. Every day felt like a step forward. Her coworkers noticed her glow. They cheered her quietly, gave her flexible shifts, supported her without asking too many questions. She felt lucky. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. One evening, her manager handed her a small envelope with her name on it. "This came for you," he said. Inside was a simple note from the foundation. "Your audition is in 3 weeks. We believe in you." Her heart jumped. 3 weeks. She nodded firmly to herself. She would be ready. 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind. The night before the audition, she barely slept, but she didn't feel anxious, just alive. On the day of the audition, she walked onto a quiet stage with a calm heart. The judges sat in a row, watching her kindly, waiting for her to begin. She placed her hands on the piano. Then she played. And this time, she didn't think about fear or failure or who she used to be. She played like someone who had lost a dream and fought her way back to it. She played like someone who knew her worth. She played like someone who wasn't afraid of living big anymore. When the final note faded, the room was silent. And one judge whispered, "Beautiful." Another nodded. "She belongs here." She left the stage trembling with pride. When she stepped outside, the sky was golden, warm, full of promise. Her phone buzzed. A new message. "Congratulations. You've been accepted." She covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of joy, of release, of victory. Her life had changed forever. Not because someone forced her to play it, Party. Not because a millionaire tried to shame her, but because she rediscovered the courage to choose herself. She walked home slowly that evening, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, the world felt big, not in a frightening way, but in